Now I want to talk about the urban-rural divide in Oregon legislative government. When I got elected, I came to the Senate and I found there that the president of the Senate was a Democrat, but he was from a rural area, Reedsport, where he was an obstetrician. No, he was an eye doctor. He examined people's eyes and gave them my prescriptions. But so then there was Vic Atiyeh, the minority leader in the Senate, a staunch Republican who had a successful small business selling carpets. Um, and there was the Republican Wally Carson, who was a lawyer to the core. And while being a Republican, he tended to want to support things that business wanted. He was not like a chamber of commerce, everything the business people want, we must have sort of a person. He was perhaps of the 30 of us the most independent, not necessarily independent, but the most non-partisan about issues that had to do with business interests versus consumer interests. But to get on with this, I've got the picture in front of me here of the 30 of us that were senators in 1977 when I first got in the state Senate. And I've just counted, and there were 6 Republicans and 24 Democrats. So you would think there would be an overwhelming Democratic control majority. But as it turned out, as I began to learn what was going on, we were in a 17-13 minority because rural Democrats had sided with Jason Bowe and business interests. And I could go down the list, but I quickly volunteered without saying so to be the assistant whip. You have the majority leader, and then you've got the whip, and then you've got the assistant whip. And by, I think, my second session there, without anybody saying much about it, I was appointed the assistant whip. But I volunteered originally for the job and started doing it, and I would go around and work on the roughly 4 Democrats and 1 Republican who could occasionally vote with us, urban Democrats. And I would just worry them with facts and persuasion, telling them this is what the majority of people want, etc. So this is what's going on in the United States of America. The cities tend to be Democratic and tend to have priorities that go along with the Democratic platform, which has a lot to do with social services and environmental protection, aging concerns, LGBTQ concerns, civil rights for racial minorities concerns. Those tend to cluster in the urban areas, and then in the rural areas, there's a resentment of the people from the city trying to run everything, and there's more of an interest in what the business community is touting is what's best for the farmers and the business people and even the Democrats out in the country. In thinking and learning about this over the years, I've discovered that one of the reasons that the rural legislators vote with the business community so much is that the Democrats, the workers out in the rural areas, are not encouraged to participate. They work for the Republicans who own the farms and the businesses, and the Republicans don't don't welcome their blue collar people to come to governmental meetings and so on and express their views very much. It's sort of like let the owners run it, whereas in the city there are more people who are working for government agencies and schools and so forth, and they don't get shooed away by Republican owners. But to get back to the 17-13 split that I found when I got there, this is an intense thing. It starts out at the beginning of the session with a choice of the President of the Senate. And I got there with my fellow Portlanders wanting to have Frank Roberts to be the President of the Senate. And we had caucuses of the Democratic senators and talked and went back and forth. And it began to be clear to me that Frank Roberts didn't have the votes. And there was a lot of indignation among the urban Democrats that since we were in the majority that we should be able to choose the leader. But the fact of the matter was that the more rural Democrats weren't going along with it. This was, they were somewhat complicated. One of the complications was that Frank Roberts had been dumped by Betty Roberts, who was in the Senate my first session there too. She jumped over to a Lane County representative named Keith Skelton, and it was, I guess, it was a session or two before I got there, but it was very public and very messy. She'd jumped out of bed with Frank and jumped into bed with Keith Skelton. Then Barbara Roberts jumped into bed with Frank Roberts, and that was all very public. And she was a very hot chick, pretty and sexy and sassy. And the women who were married to the male senators were threatened by Barbara and her beauty and her sexiness and her having been able to scoop up another man so quickly and so publicly. And then you lay onto that the social liberalism of gay rights advocacy, same-sex marriage and so on, which people who are more socially conservative, which people from the country tend to be, resent that. And here are the urban people promoting gay rights. So there were social value components as well as business components of the urban-rural split. And you could add to that that some of the urban legislators allowed themselves to be highly influenced by business people. One of the things that puzzled me until I got so used to it, it didn't puzzle me anymore, and that was that Frank and Barbara Roberts had become best friends with Dave Barrows and Frank Bronner, who were the lobbyists respectively for the savings and loans and for the commercial banks. And they went out to dinner with those two guys regularly. They were both very physically strong presence, stronger than most legislators, I might say, just in the way they carried themselves. And of course, they had this huge pot of money that they could wield around. So one day we passed, the Senate passed a bill that repealed the usury rate for home loans by the Veterans Home Loan Program. And a builder had slipped into my office a couple of weeks before the bill came on the floor and told me, I don't want you to use my name, but I want to tell you that we can continue to build houses with the Veterans Home Loan Program if you don't lift the usury limit. We can get it done. We can slip the financing in there under that limit, and people will be able to continue to borrow money and have us build houses. Well, for some reason, he was sort of a voice crying in the wilderness. There was no heavy lobbying in favor of the veterans and being able to protect their loan interest limit. And loan interests were skyrocketing at the time. This was in, I think, I can't remember, my first session? I think it was my first session, 77, and I was there all about trying to protect the interests of working people. And of course, many veterans are blue-collar workers and with modest incomes who would have trouble borrowing enough money to build or buy a new house. On the day of the vote, prior to the vote, I went around and tried to talk to my colleagues, starting with my Democrats from the city, and found that I was up against a brick wall. They had bought hook, line, and sinker the argument that if they didn't raise that limit, home loans from the Veterans Home Loan Program would come to an absolute standstill. So it was sort of like, well, do you want to let the interest rate go up, or do you want to have people be able to continue to build and buy houses? But on the day of the vote, I got up and argued, and it passed. And I went back to sit on a bench out by the water fountain at the back of the chamber, and Steve Conforti wandered back there and saw me sitting there, and I was pouting, something I tried very hard never to do when I had a setback. But that day, that was such a stark violation of what I thought I was there for. I was pouting, and Steve came back and asked me why, and I told him. Well, then Frank Roberts came drifting back there, and he said, well, Steve, Jan seems to be unhappy. What's he so unhappy about? And Steve said, iconically, well, Frank, I think Jan is feeling that we're better friends with Frank Bronner and Dave Barrows than we are with him. And it was true. It was so true, partly because they had formed friendships with those two bank lobbyists for years before I appeared on the scene. And without digressing too much, I lived to see them both die. Frank Bronner had a stroke and then struggled on for a few years. I saw him after he had the stroke, and he and I were very cordial with each other. He was a very charming man. I read in Wikipedia, if you look up Frank Bronner, it will tell you that he was touted as the man who had invented the slogan, "We just want to play on an even playing field." Well, a citizen lobbyist for a senior group, after Frank Bronner testified to that in a committee that I was on, this man got up and said, yeah, he wants to play on an even playing field, said the elephant stomping around in the chicken coop. So much power. Frank had so much power, and he just crushed the citizen lobbyists. Jan is feeling maybe we're better friends with Frank Bronner and Dave Barrows than we are with him. I could go on and on about my battles with the savings and loans, particularly, and I will on another video. But another thing that happened while I was there, to somebody that I thought was basically one of the most honest of the senators, was Vic Atiyeh. But this influence by mind benders eventually hurt him. I had no idea that he was a corrupt man. But after he got to be governor, he and his wife Dolores were sucked in by a PR firm to the idea that since they were having trouble affording the entertaining they thought they needed to do in the governor's mansion, this lobbying group or public information group convinced Vic that they should have a fundraiser and raise money so they could entertain more. Well, the problem with that was that a core person in that group that raised the money was somebody who got married to a fellow who was in prison for murder, and that she was lobbying to get his sentence commuted, which Vic did commute the sentence. And when we yelled foul that he was being influenced by this lobby agency, and then had made the mistake of commuting the sentence on somebody who'd committed a very horrendous murder, that embarrassed the hell out of Vic. And I feel a little bad about it, really, in retrospect, because I think he just got sucked in with this without really thinking it through. So anyway, I'll take this up later. I've got a guest here now, but I'm just getting going on the urban-rural split, and you can see that I talk about business lobby interests and rural-urban split. They're overlapping subjects.